a written statement from Harry as well. And clearly talking about this is not something that has happened in the past and is a done deal and now we're trying to get the truth out from 1995, but actually talking about how the effect on the family even today still rippling on. What do you make of it, and what do you think is the significance of what was said by Lord Dyson and indeed Prince William?
I think the significance, as so often, is the cover-up. The cover-up here involves basically two former Director Generals of the BBC, one who was in position at the time, the other, Lord Hall, who went on to become chairman of the BBC after basically exonerating the organisation, basically, as he now says he shouldn't have done, but he trusted Martin Bashir at his word. I think that's the problem. I mean, I think it's not just the BBC that does this. Most institutions, as your previous guest said, sort of try to cover over their traces if they do stuff that's wrong. But this is an extraordinary level of dishonesty by Martin Bashir that's been revealed. I think that if it was a journalist at one of our newspapers, the BBC would be calling for full judicial-led inquiries, regulation of the press, and much more. But this was a BBC journalist faking documents to try to further, worry and make more paranoid an already very unstable, sadly, woman as Princess Diana was at the time. And I think it's an extraordinary level of deception. And if it was anyone else in the media or press, the BBC would be calling for heads right now.
And wouldn't they just? I mean, this isn't, again, it was a very clear point made by Prince William. This wasn't a rogue reporter, and everyone's going, this is absolutely shocking. They knew it. There would have been people around him who knew it at the time. Certainly by 1996, they did an investigation. They knew it. The cover-up continued again and again and again. Even this has only come out not because of this Dyson report. The Dyson report has only happened because of reports in the press last year as a result of freedom of information requests, which of course were fought against for long periods of time. Is it possible that we now are going to see repercussions of this being far wider than maybe heads rolling? Civil cases, criminal cases, all of which, by the way, costing millions of pounds that will come out of your and my taxpayer-funded licence fee. But are there also other repercussions in terms of the trust for the BBC generally and its role as a state broadcaster, its role in a position where they are able to basically insist that we go to prison if we don't pay the tax to pay for the BBC?
I think what will actually happen, there are lots of things that could happen, there are lots of things that you and I might want to happen. I think that what will happen is that the BBC will successfully claim that this was one person in the past. You say it wasn't just a rogue reporter, but they will succeed in getting away with that claim. They will succeed in saying this is a long time ago, why dig it all up now, and much more. But as I say, I just return to this point. I mean, this is an extraordinary level of deception that went on. And if it had been any member of the press other than the BBC, we would be getting, unbelievable judicial inquiries and calls for the press to be reined in. And people will be talking about the toxic environment in Fleet Street and much more.
Indeed. Just breaking news, the Metropolitan Police have announced they are going to assess the contents of Lord Dyson's report and decide whether or not any criminal proceedings will continue or will start.
Yeah, I mean, whenever the police do something like that, I always sigh slightly. They quite like taking up investigations that somebody else has done and then announcing they're going to have a 10-year investigation of their own into it, and before you know, everybody's dead. So I wouldn't put too much hope in that.
Interesting. Let's talk about, you mentioned, before long everybody's dead. We spend a lot of time these days dealing with people who are long dead. Anybody who's had a statue to them ever put up in this country seems to be coming under big question marks these days by the Woke Brigade. Yesterday we had a sort of a victory of sorts, but certainly a victory for the wrong reasons. A statue of Cecil Rhodes was decided that it will remain at Oriel College, Oxford, after Dons decided it would take too long and cost too much to take it down, despite the fact there had been an independent commission which had backed the decision to remove the statue. This after people had objected to the fact that there was a statue to someone who, in their view, perpetuated the views of colonialism and racism and goodness knows what else. Now, I'm glad that the statue is staying, but probably for the wrong reasons it's staying. What did you make of that decision and indeed the entire process and the arguments we've had over the last few years about whether or not we should remove statues of anybody who doesn't match up to our exacting standards of today?
Yeah, the Cecil Rhodes statue is almost a sort of blueprint for this. It's been going on for about 10 years now. It started because some South African students, the leader of whom was actually on a Rhodes scholarship at Oxford, basically, I think this bit wasn't understood, were auditioning to begin political careers back home in South Africa. And so they sort of whipped people up and pretended that they just couldn't bear walking past this statue, which you really can't see very easily at all from street level. They couldn't bear walking past this, that it made it oppressive, that it was a symbol that Oxford was racist, and a lot of other things that were just completely untrue, insincere, and fallacious. But, you know, students are particularly vulnerable to people making these claims and can easily be derailed into thinking, but, you know, if you took down this one statue, all bigotry in the world could be solved. And so it became a campaigning issue for students at Oxford and elsewhere. And it's very interesting. I don't at all blame the Dons of Oriel for saying it is taking up so much of our time. It is such a diversion. We don't know how we can make the applications to get it off the building, given that we're a listed building, and much more. I think they're completely right, because this argument has gone round and round in recent years. Yep. It has been very unenlightening, by the way, incidentally, about who Cecil Rhodes was. The campaigners to bring down the statue almost always say things that are not true, or they haven't bothered to check up about him. They have not bothered to contextualize history. For students, they display an extraordinary lack of intelligence or curiosity. But they make these claims, and actually, we didn't have the debate that we should have had about it. We had a very one-sided campaigning debate that ended up being taken over last year by BLM activists, and I lament, apart from anything else, the unbelievable level of incuriosity that's been displayed. Last year, when BLM were campaigning around this, one of the BLM people said that Cecil Rhodes's inheritance and money should be used, for instance, to set up a scholarship program so that people could go to Oxford. What, you mean like the Rhodes Scholarship?
It's like the most famous scholarship in the country.
Most famous scholarship in the world. Actually, by the way, they've been, for the last 20 years, they've been known as the Rhodes Mandela Scholarships, because Nelson Mandela put his name to it as well, in a very magnanimous and generous gesture.
Rather telling. I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it? And again, you know, when they deride, you know, with Winston Churchill and others, and just not understanding you haven't even got the right to have that march, let alone deface that statue. If it wasn't for Sir Winston Churchill, it's quite painful to watch. Just finally, very briefly, if you would, the freedom of speech, where the government has said they want to sort of basically enforce the right to freedom of speech and to end no platforming and censoring going on in our universities. Do you think they're going to succeed in that?
I wish them well, but it's going to be an uphill task. And the reason is that it's not just legislation, of course, that's needed. It's a culture change at the universities. The letters page in the Times yesterday was very revealing. Prominent academics, but it was the few academics who do try to speak out, who wrote to the Times and said, the evidence is, if you're a Brexit supporter, for instance, and you were in university teaching professions, the evidence shows you would not share your voting preferences with your colleagues. So it's a cultural change that needs to happen in our universities. Our universities now have most young British people going into them. In that situation, this is no longer an elite thing, and therefore a left-wing elite cannot capture these institutions solely for themselves.
Absolutely. Douglas Murray, it is always such a pleasure speaking to you. I always know that my listeners are just cheering you on. A voice of sanity and reason in the darkness. Always so good to talk to you. That's Douglas Murray. Of course, his most recent book, absolutely brilliant, The Madness of Crowds. Absolutely must-read book.